Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Just welcoming everyone to this AAP Public Dialogue series. To those joining, we're just waiting a few minutes for folks to join, and then we will get started. Okay. It looks like we're all good. So we can get started this morning. Welcome. I want to welcome all of you to this AAP Public Dialogue series on transdisciplinary. I can turn on my camera on transdisciplinary research, breaking silos for complex problem solving. Justin, could you go to the next slide, please? I just want to share a few my name is Amy Jameson. I'm co-director of the Alliance for African Partnership. And I'm just here for the introductory portion of the dialogue. So the session is scheduled for 90 minutes. We will have a French interpretation available, and the button is located at the bottom of your screen. It should say interpretation, and you can choose the French channel and follow along in French. Each panelist will present their remarks. So this is set up as a panel discussion. We hope for a real dialogue this morning or afternoon, wherever you're located. So they'll present their remarks, and then we'll have an open audience Q&A. But you can type your questions ahead of time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and they'll be addressed during the Q&A session. We also invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, your name and where you're coming from, your institution and country. So we will get started. Justin, next slide. I do want to introduce today's moderator. We are very pleased to be joined by Dr. Dorothy Ngila, who is a science policy and research governance expert, and she serves as the Director of Knowledge and Institutional Networks at South Africa's National Research Foundation. Dorothy has moderated dialogues in the past and is really a thoughtful and very talented moderator. So we're really pleased that she's able to join us here today. So without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Dr. Dorothy Ngila. I should also mention that she serves on AAP's advisory board. And so we're very lucky to have her in that capacity as well. So thank you, Dr. Ngila. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jameson, for the introduction. It's really a great pleasure for me to be moderating this session that is exploring TDR, transdisciplinary research. My work at the National Research Foundation, and actually over the last 17 years, sits at the intersection of science, policy, and society, a space that we often describe as science diplomacy, where the goal is to connect ideas, people, and institutions in ways that enable shared learning and collective action. So for this session, it really is a pleasure for me to engage in this dialogue about a field that reminds us that no single discipline, institution, or country holds all the answers. In many ways, TDR is science diplomacy in action. It asks us to work beyond boundaries, value different kinds of knowledge, and co-create solutions that speak to the complexities of our world. I look forward very much to guiding our conversation today, one that brings researchers and practitioners who are living this collaboration every day. The discussion today explores how TDR can transform Africa's developmental trajectory by addressing institutional barriers, embedding indigenous and local knowledge into equitable partnerships, and identifying sustainable strategies to strengthen collaboration and resource mobilization across higher education. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel. We are joined by Professor Tawana Kupe, who is a global higher education strategy advisor, Professor Michael O'Rourke, Director of the Center for Interdisciplinarity at MSU, Dr. Joyce Nakatumba Nabende, Senior Lecturer at the Center for Artificial Intelligence at Makerere University, and Mr. Raphael Lembi, doctoral student in Community Sustainability at MSU. Please may I request all the panel members to switch on their videos. We will kick straight into the guiding questions that we have for our dialogue today. And I want to start with you, Professor Coupe and Mr. Lembi, starting with you, Professor Coupe, around this question of why TDR is essential in addressing complex global challenges. You each have 5 minutes, and I hand over to you, Professor Coupe. Thank you. You are muted.
Apologies, I've forgotten the COVID issues where we had to unmute ourselves. Okay, straight into it. Good to see you, Dr. Ngila, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those in the US and other time horizons. Well, I think that transdisciplinary research is not just essential, but critical to addressing complex problems. In part, let me be slightly tautological because of their complexity, if you like. But they are not just complex, they are also complicated and multi-layered and multifaceted, and therefore cannot be addressed from a single disciplinary lens. It is also true that, and that is why we call complicated, complex, pressing social issues and challenges wicked problems. A wicked problem is one that which, despite producing knowledge which is appropriate to addressing it, it appears intractable beyond being solved. It appears also to get worse, if you like, because it's affected, as I said, by multiple factors. If you look at, for example, scientific knowledge in any field, I'll just choose health, for example, because of the COVID we just suffered. The discovery of vaccines in the shortest possible time did not necessarily mean that that problem was solved immediately. Because what happened? Vaccine hesitancy and vaccine denial erupted from multiple other, not just vaccine denialists, but people of particular religions, people of particular political persuasions. And why did this information spread so widely before? Because traditional means of information dissemination, including health information, had also collapsed. Traditional or legacy media has collapsed. In its place has come something that should be potentially good: technologies, rapidly advancing technologies that will disseminate information across society very quickly and reach everybody, so they could adopt particular health strategies in relation to COVID or any other issue. But no, that's not all that happened. What also happened was that there were channels of disinformation and misinformation, because also traditional channels of information had actually collapsed. So everybody became a doctor, a denialist, had now a multiple platform using their WhatsApp messages. So that is why transdisciplinary research becomes very important, because you couldn't possibly say you're going to solve this problem by the right medical solution, because it's no longer just a medical issue. It's a social issue, it's a political issue, it's an ideological issue, and it's not just one political strand that you are dealing with, it's not just one religion you are dealing with, it's not just one source of information you are dealing with, it's varieties of information, some of which are patently untrue and patently very dangerous. That is why transdisciplinary research becomes important, because you can't stay behind one scientific or academic lens or one research. And also, you can't simply say you are the only person with the knowledge. Couldn't be vaccine scientists and universities that had this information. You now needed to address vaccine hesitancy and denial, to also address, to have on board political players, religious players, and others. And also remember, I'm even being narrow in this context. Some people would refuse vaccines for what they call traditional reasons, or reasons arising out of their culture. So, what do you need in that aspect also? understanding people's lived realities and their belief systems and how they interact with others. So indigenous knowledge becomes very important. Cultural knowledge becomes very, very important. In that space, then, co-creation of knowledge becomes very, very important. And co-creating with society, initiating with society. Yes, the academy remains central, initiating, originating, but the academy is no longer the only source of wisdom. The wisdom now comes from societal actors more generally, and also so the value and the richness of transdisciplinary research, therefore, is crossing disciplinary boundaries, crossing knowledge forms, integrating them, and therefore in as confronting the solution, which, by the way, you are not assured of solving because intractable, wicked, but hopefully by putting all of forms of knowledge together and all actors together, we're able to see our way to more sustainable solutions. I think, unless you say I have another minute, I can go on.
That's great. Thank you. So what I'm reminded of is, in addition to us talking about these challenges being complex, we also have to add words such as multi-layered, multifaceted, complicated, wickedness, right? And what that does is it gives us an idea of how important it is to position transdisciplinary research really as a one-way solution to these kinds of challenges. I also really appreciated your addition and reminding us that the media is an important channel as we think about transdisciplinary research. And I'm looking forward to coming back to you to hear a little bit about how you think we could catalyze or facilitate that engagement with the media. I'm going to turn over to you, Mr. Lembi, the same question from your perspective. Why is transdisciplinary research essential in addressing these complex, wicked global challenges?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Good morning, good afternoon for everyone. Thanks for your words, Dr. Coupe, Dr. Nagila. I'm going to try, to add to what Dr. Coupe already said. It's very useful and very precise. And I'd like to first start by clarifying what I understand to be transdisciplinary research, because we're starting here in this panel. And like Dr. Coupe said, it's one of these words that different people will perceive and interpret it in different ways. So I think that's important for us to talk about today. And my understanding of transdisciplinary research is that it's a collaborative and reflexive process of knowledge contribution, co-production that seeks to address a problem, contribute sustainability to human flourishing. And transdisciplinary research stands out because it's engaging beyond the boundaries of disciplines and knowledge systems by focusing on like a given problem and opportunity at hand. And also because it emphasizes both knowledge and action. So for people involved with transdisciplinary research efforts, we're trying to create knowledge that serves the purpose of advancing some sort of like transformation or some sort of desired change that will like help us move from like a more unsustainable towards a more sustainable system, for instance. In more practical terms, for people like me, people like some of the other panelists who are academics based at universities, usually when people say that they're doing transdisciplinary research, it means that they're doing projects or initiatives that are collaborating with non-academic partners, right? So that means community-based organizations, NGOs, social movements, government, businesses, farmers, and so many options. That's the fun of this topic, that there's many, many ways to go about this. And why is this relevant, right? For global challenges such as climate change, food insecurity, building healthier societies. And building up on what Dr. Cooper already said, my take on transdisciplinary research that it explicitly recognizes this multidimensional, multi-layered, like we just heard right now, nature of these complex problems. So one of the biggest insights from transdisciplinary research, in my perspective, is that it acknowledges and emphasizes how different people with different values perceive and experience and propose solutions to problems in different ways. And in that realization, then we can know that universities and researchers alone cannot really address complex problems, like climate change in just enactable ways. So if you think about climate change, for example, some people think that climate change is about, decarbonizing our energy systems, moving away from fossil fuels. For other people, it'll be about, protecting areas of forests that store a lot of carbon. For other people, it's about, creating support for those people that are most impacted by things like extreme weather events. And you can see that like some of these problems emphasize social, some of these views emphasize ecological or technological dimensions. And what transdisciplinary research is asking us is to consider that all these views of the same problem are true at the same time. So to be able to actually engage with these complex problems, we need research that can consider this diversity of viewpoints and consider like these multiple perspectives that can enrich our understanding of this problem, right? So like we were saying, like Dr. Coupe was saying, it's not ecology, it's not policymaking or activism or climatologists that are going to solve, or social scientists, even they're going to be able to solve climate change, right? It's about us working together and combining these different perspectives to create like new understandings and new solutions about these issues. So basically, transdisciplinary research is asking us to figure out how can we work together, right? How can we build like shared language, understandings, and theories that will allow us to propose like solutions that are actually like just and equitable. And since the goal of transdisciplinary research is to produce transformations, to advance change, it is a way of research that also very explicitly asks us to like consider power in politics, right? So how do we as researchers or how do we as policymakers believe that problems such as climate change can be even solved, And who are the groups that hold the levers of power, that will allow us to like actually do something about them? So what are our theories of change? Do they make sense for people outside of academia? What kind of values influence how people think about this problem? So in this brief minutes that I've been talking, I guess my summary here is that the biggest strength of transdisciplinary research is that it forces us to ask very basic questions about the nature of knowledge and the nature of the problems that we care about, and what kind of knowledge is actually helpful in this process. But of course, it's much, much easier to say than actually do this type of work. So I'm looking forward to hear from the other panelists as well. How do we actually do this? My perspective is trying to do this since graduate school, since my doctoral studies. So I think it's been a very interesting experience, but I'm keen to also hear from others that have been engaging with this for much longer than me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lembe, for that. So I'm hearing in the academic space, we think about TDR as one where academic and non-academic actors are coming together to define research questions to co-implement. But there are indeed different interpretations of what TDR means, and those interpretations are valid. And what we're being asked in the academic space is to consider what that looks like for what our value system in the academy is, as well as how different perspectives can come into play. What is also standing out from what you spoke about, and it also speaks very much to Professor Cooper, but from a different perspective, is this idea of centering power and politics. When we talk about TDR, you will speak to it in terms of media, Professor Cooper, when we come back to you. I want to move now to speak to the examples of TDR. We have now heard what transdisciplinary research is. I think we have a good value proposition for why we need to engage in TDR. I want to ask Dr. Nakatumba Nabende and Professor O'Rourke to share with us examples that they have of TDR initiatives that have led to concrete or societal or policy changes. And as you share, to please highlight what made the initiative successful for you from the perspective of TDR. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Nakatumba Nabende.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ngira. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. And thank you again for the invitation to speak at this panel. I think when I think about the transdisciplinary research, it really speaks to the work that we do. So I have my background in computer science, and now with the helm of AI and machine learning and how we can be able to apply this for societal good. I think it really speaks to the fact that I come away from my computing discipline to build AI models and machine learning models that can apply for societal good. So thinking about a problem that the society needs, and that's the ethos of what we do at the center of AI, where we build an end-to-end solutions, incorporating the problem from the community, where AI and machine learning can be applied to solve a particular problem, but also trying to do this in a way that we can overlay with the different stakeholders that can contribute to solving this problem. So the example that I can give is the work that we have done around building models for agricultural advisory for smallholder farmers, but not only the farmers, also thinking about building image phenotyping tools, for example, for the agricultural experts, because these are the two very important players as we try to come up with different varieties of crops that they do along their breeding cycle. So as computer scientists, I know nothing about agriculture, although I did agriculture at high school, but that was many years ago. But coming into this world now with my computing background, having done that from my bachelor's degree, I really needed to sit down with the agriculture experts to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve with AI, because they want to try and come up with a particular solution for a societal need that they have. And there were several problems that we have worked on so far with them. And maybe I'll just pinpoint one around, for example, image phenotyping for crop disease diagnosis, because that's easy for us to understand. So when we look at the different breeding cycles that the agriculturists go through, they try to understand, how can I be able to score if my cassava has a particular disease or not? If I look at it from the farmer perspective, I take a mobile phone as a farmer. How can I be able to take an image in the garden, provide diagnosis? But it's not just about diagnosis, it's also about advisory. So it brings me back to the point of when we are doing this research, that you understand the problem. As computer scientists, we're going to step into their world to understand what it means if they don't have advisory for a crop, that a disease that they have found in their garden. Then when I think about the social aspects, and thanks to the previous panelists who have given, complex issues around the social aspects of it, if I have to develop a mobile application and I have to give it to a smallholder farmer, but I need to understand what is the mobile phone ownership in communities in African, for different, for example, farmers in African communities. As we know, many of the people who are engaging in agriculture are female, but who owns the mobile phones in their homes? It's a male. So how can you be able to address such complex scenarios, even regarding to mobile phone ownership for the technology that you are building out, that at the end of the day, that the person who really needs this technology, who is the female farmer, can be able to benefit from the technology that you're providing. So what has made it, I think, successful for us is, again, understanding that problem, co-designing this problem together with the experts, together with the farmers, to understand that if I don't have a phone, perhaps I can be able to reach out to a leader in my community to get the agricultural advisory that you have provided using AI, and tap into that, because I understand the dynamics in which I am and in which the technology can be provided. Or if it's considering, for example, low-end phones with maybe are able to work with low internet connectivity or limited connectivity, how can I, as a researcher, be able to solve that complex problem, to come up with a model that is smaller, that can be deployed on a mobile phone, that a farmer with limited connectivity, with a with a low-end mobile device, can still be able to have access to this. And the things that we have also learned is the collaboration with, of course, the National Agricultural Research Organization that is in charge of uptaking these digital technologies. That has also been very helpful for us, because they can be able to roll out technologies, to incorporate them as part of their planning for their different programs that they have within their sector. And I'm happy to report that just recently they have also been able to think about AI as a technology besides just mobile phones. Can we also have digital technologies? Can we have AI as a technology that they can incorporate among their breeding programs? Can they think about how to support this with all the technicalities that come with building AI technologies, particularly with the elm that we have right now with generative AI models? So working and collaborating and understanding the problem from the onset with them has been one of the things that has helped us to do the transdisciplinary research that we're talking about today. Yeah, thank you. I think I'll stop
Thank
there for
you.
now.
Thank you very much, Doctor. For me, it was listening to you. You're not saying that we must co-design. You are actually sharing with us, what does it look like to co-design, right? It looks like co-defining the research problem. It looks like co-asking the research questions. It looks like making sure you are aware of who the key stakeholders are, decision makers within the community, in your national space, and making sure that they are in the room and that you're engaging them across the whole pipeline of your engagement. Thank you for that. Professor O'Rourke, over to you. Same question.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael O'Rourke. I'm a professor in the philosophy department at Michigan State University, where I'm also the executive director of the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative Center, which is an NSF and NASA-sponsored effort that uses structured dialogue to build collaborative capacity in complex cross-disciplinary research and practice contexts. So this includes research that focuses on solving problems with community partners and partners from outside academic research. And that is, it includes capacity building efforts in transdisciplinary contexts. We've engaged in a number of different transdisciplinary projects. The one that I'll talk about today took place in Africa from 2015 to 2021. TDI, as we call it, Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, participated as a partner in the Woody Weeds project, which is a Swiss National Science Foundation sponsored effort that focused on developing sustainable management plans for woody invasive alien species in Tanzania, Kenya, and Ethiopia. These species included things like mesquite or prosopis, basically woody trees that can take over in different environments. Woody Weeds involved the close collaboration of representatives from many communities, including universities, local and indigenous communities, NGOs, federal level agencies. The researchers involved in this project included biologists, ecologists, rural sociologists, remote sensing and GIS experts, sustainability scientists, and a philosopher. The project was divided into 3 phases. The first phase used plot-based socio-environmental research techniques to understand dynamics and impacts of invasions by woody alien species like mesquite. The second phase focused on taking what was learned in phase 1, using tools of remote sensing, and increasing the scale of our understanding, so that you can predict the future trajectories of these invasions. And then phase 3 built on this understanding and developed local implementation groups to design and execute sustainable management plans that were intended to help preserve traditional ways of life, including pastoralist ways of life in these countries. This project generated quite a few publications, but more importantly, from the perspective of transdisciplinary success, it had an impact on invasive species policy in all 3 countries. So in Kenya, the project team provided a report with the major findings of to the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Forestry through the Kenya Forestry Research Institute. And this report became a key resource during the drafting of a new national prosopis strategy in 2020 and 2021. In Tanzania, 3 project partners were members, with one acting as chair, of the task force mandated by Tanzania's Vice President's office to draft the National Invasive Species Strategy and Action Plan for Tanzania. And in Ethiopia, policymakers requested data summaries, which have so far not led to changes at the policy level or at the level of on-the-ground management of invasive tree species, but conversations are ongoing, and the experts involved in the Woody Weeds project are a key part of those conversations. This project was successful for, I think, quite a few reasons. I'll just point to 2. And this really echoes what Joyce was saying and what all of the speakers have been saying so far. The leadership of Woody Weeds recognized that in order for this to be successful, stakeholder communities had to be involved from the beginning, or at least almost the beginning, in deliberation and decision making. Once it was funded, the leadership began meeting with representatives of African universities and began identifying representatives of other communities to involve in project planning. The project met every 8 months or so in a different African country, and each meeting devoted substantial time to planning and listening sessions with stakeholders from the home country. Another key factor was communication. The leadership recognized that communication would need to take place across many dimensions of difference, and that would be critical to the success of the project, that both relationship building and information transfer were required to ensure that the project was successful from the start. We were involved, TDI was involved to help manage communication, running dialogue-based workshops and regularly gathering data about project communications so that the project could make adjustments as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm hearing from you, time is very important, and in alignment to Professor Cooper's strategic communications, the role of the media, dissemination of information, quite critical. Across borders, across disciplines, policy impact is a core aspect of the project that you have just shared with us. Thank you. I would like to come back to you, Professor Cooper and Mr. Lembe, just wanting to hold this question around the media, question also around communications, but also utilizing this to think about how can indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, indigenous and local knowledge systems be better integrated into TDR, ensuring two things: ethical collaboration, equal partnerships with the communities, and really bringing it all together with the projects that we've heard. Now, this time around, 5 minutes again. I will start with you, Mr. Lembe.
Thank you so much. I think this is a great question. It's an excellent question, and I'm happy to go after Professor Rourke because I think he was touching the subject like just now because ultimately my first thoughts thinking about transdisciplinary research is fundamentally about relationships. So even before starting a project, like like I was saying, we should consider like building these relationships and figure out ways to do research with people, right? Not on people. So before we like start considering like how to integrate these diverse ways of knowing, right? We should like have these relationships on set that will allow us to say like, is this even the right move to make, right? What do we need to integrate for what purposes and under what conditions, right? And when engaging with indigenous and local communities, it's also very important to be cognizant of the fact that they may have had previous histories of unpleasant histories or even resentments, towards researchers and universities due to previous interactions. So it's very important of like to know the history of our institutions and the places where we work, which oftentimes tend to be very problematic, right? So for the context of each transdisciplinary research project, it's important to build this trust and cultivate these reciprocal relationships. And I think to allow for integration in ethical and equitable ways, it is a question about transparency, like having sure that this communication is clear, like you're saying, and that it is coming from multiple ways. And so figuring out like why is this project being developed and who's being included, who's not being included, what are the benefits and commitments from each part, and understanding as well that this participation and this integration of knowledge occurs across a spectrum, right? So it's not that we need to integrate everything all the times to achieve our goals. It's about figuring out shared language and norms in a project to decide when certain types of knowledge will or will not be considered to answer a given research questions. And I think also in this process of integrating knowledge, an important part is to be clear about the limits of each transdisciplinary research project, because oftentimes we use these very big words and this jargon in academia, and the reality is it's not every project, like it's going to be the project that Professor Work was saying that's going to be able to like, make it all the way to like influencing like national policy making, right? So let's say we're doing our transdisciplinary research project. We started from like this good place of transparent communication, of clear norms and agreements, and we have these relationships from the onset that start with this point of equity and ethics. We need to also be cognizant that this like discussions about the ethical and equitable ways to integrate knowledge, we need to like be constantly carried out through the process of a project, right? It's not something that you get to decide in the beginning and then you just like carry on. There's a need for like serious and long and structured conversations, like Professor Work was saying, to figure out like what are we expecting from this project and how we're going to make sure that we're not just saying that we're equitable and ethical, but we're actually also practicing it. So for instance, one of the questions that also happens in this process that when we try to like engage with these diverse knowledge systems is, so who owns the data, right? Who gets to write and to talk about this project, and how is the experience of our indigenous and our local community partners being recognized and also compensated for it, right? And I said a lot of questions, been speaking in very abstract terms, but I feel like one example that I can give in this final minute of my of my talk here is that there's a project, a transdisciplinary research project that I was a part of that was engaging with stakeholders based in the city of Flint in Michigan. And the city of Flint has had a history of many researchers coming to that place and like doing research, but not really taking the time to build reciprocal and ethical relationships. So one strategy that they did in the city of Flint that I think could be inspiring to other contexts and projects that they created like a community institutional review board. So like this is not something that is attached to university, it's attached to like local organizations that are people from the community, community leaders and practitioners who get to review what kind of research is going to be actually implemented in their city and then figure out like, oh, is this research something that's actually interesting and actable and ethical for us? And through this effort as well in the city of Flint, they created something that's called a Flint Data Inventory. So it's very interesting to see like how other places are trying to like gather all this data, gather all these ways of knowing, and make it also publicly accessible, you know, when you're thinking about who gets to access this data that's being produced by these transdisciplinary research projects. And I said a bunch of things, but I guess my key takeaway from what I'm saying here is that I really want to stress that this type of research is ultimately about relationships. And so when making decisions about integrating knowledge, we should figure out, is the way we're doing this, is it helping our relationships in this project to thrive or is it actually like negatively impacting, the dynamics and the context in which we're a part of? And this should be like a good reflexive question that will guide us to figure out whether being ethical and actable. But of course, this will be specific to each project and to each person and to each context. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Relationships, relationships, relationships. That's the core part of what you have indicated here. Center that, and TDR becomes something that is easier and more manageable. Thank you. Professor Coupe, over to you. Same question.
Thank you, Dorothy. So the thing about this is, of course, first of all, I like the premise of the question. It says better integrated. So I like to just, as a retort, to say if it is integrated at all. But of course, if it is not integrated, it would not be TDR in my view. And first, I think that the question, what is important, and my two colleagues before me, including Dr. Oruk, and the colleague before have made me think in answering this question that critical self-reflexivity is very, very important on the part of the academics or the researchers. And I'll say that for two reasons is that, you see, I think that when we say we're going to integrate indigenous and local knowledge, we have to actually say those terms are not in themselves understood the same way by everybody. What goes for indigenous and what goes for local knowledge would need actually, in essence, in carrying out the project to be reflected upon. What do we mean by indigenous and local knowledge? I like when talking about this topic also to talk about what I call professional or working knowledge, or knowledge that arises from lived realities. It's not, to put it somewhat disparagingly for people like us in academia, book knowledge or theories. Is the knowledge that people acquire by simply being immersed in the reality of their daily life or what they do. So I think all of those forms of knowledge, if you like, I'd like to say, should be integrated in this. And my colleagues have already said it. The first thing is actually to try, and Dr. Rook put it very beautifully. He said the community should be involved right at the beginning. Then he modified it and said, at least at least nearly initially, because remember what we do is that we conceptualize these projects within the academy. We apply for funding, we get the funding, and we get to the community. So certain things are already set, not exactly in stone, but they are already bound by certain parameters. We can't suddenly go back to the funders or to the research committee and say the project is changed totally, but we're going to co-create some knowledge with the community. So we must, so critical self-reflexivity as part of the integration must also be understanding our institutional power and location, and that we come already with ready-made frames. So to better integrate this is that we must be willing to unlearn and learn and relearn as we engage with communities in the research endeavor. And as my colleague said, they're not being subjects or objects of our research, but actors in the research. After all, TD transdisciplinary research claim to fame is that it is intentionally directed at providing solutions for pressing issues and challenges. It is not just a journey, another academic journey to prove particular theories. If it is so, then it is possible that you don't know the answers at the beginning and that you will relearn with others and learn from them. By others here, I don't mean other disciplines only, but the rest of the community, if you like. So for me, that's part of critical self-reflexivity, and it will better integrate it. Because then, in a sense, you seek to equalize already unequal power relations, right? And you don't pretend that you do not come with the institutionalized frameworks, the power of the institution, the power of your qualification, and all of that. But you are self-conscious about it. And also you begin to open yourself. So it means that we should be able to also be able to find nuanced ways of reconceptualizing some of the hard surfaces of the research project in order to incorporate what the community says are the real problems, if you like, not the ones that the theory says are the problems, if you like. So I think that will also contribute to better integration. Last 2 points is to say also that language and culture will matter. And often in many of these research projects, we come with both the academic language and conceptualizations, which is not the language of the community, and also sometimes there's differences in human languages. So their translation is at play, and translation is not an innocent exercise. Then also culture or cultures also at play. How do we, in local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, professional knowledge, how do we navigate gendered power relations, cultural power relations, generational power, all of those things can stand in the way of better integration of knowledges, and who claims to be the source of knowledge in the of that knowledge in the community. Last but not least, I mean, you must also have the willingness to accept failure as conceptualized in the research project. One of the books I recently read was a very interesting book. It was a book on 10 transdisciplinary research projects that failed, but put failed in quotation marks. In fact, in all of those projects, something was learned which was not originally intended. But if you read the research proposal or project, it actually failed. That is not what it was meant to do. Actually, though, change happened and in ways that were not anticipated. For me, that would be the beauty of transdisciplinary research. You get in knowing so much, you become a student, and you get out knowing more together with others. Collective co-creation of knowledge that is transformative.
So in many ways up to now, especially what you have just mentioned, Professor Cooper and Mr. Lemby, is really an upside down thinking about the current academic culture that we have. We're asking for greater research and reflexivity. We are asking to consider that the academic knowledge is not supreme, that there are different other ways of engaging with knowledge, language and culture becoming very, very important. Really important to understand, what do we mean by local and indigenous knowledge systems? This is not necessarily the way that as researchers we want to engage with non-academic actors. We have our boundaries. There are the academic processes and procedures, the ethical considerations that the university is requiring of researchers. And so having said all of that, I want to go back to Dr. Nakatumba Nabende and Professor O'Rourke to ask then, what are the reforms and innovations do we need to align funding, publishing, career progression, and to do an upside down of the academic culture so that it is more aligned to TDR, given what we have just heard? Thank you. I will start with you, Professor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Dr. Nagila. I think my thoughts in response to this question are probably going to overlap with much of what's already been said. Just to kind of think of this as just sort of emphasizing comments that have been made. Starting with the comment Dr. Nagila, you mentioned about relationships. It's relationships, right? And that's I want to focus on what I take to be a critical aspect of TDR success, and that's trust, right? You need to work hard in a TDR project, in my view, to make sure that everyone in the project trusts one another and is willing to be vulnerable and learn from one another in a way that can help members of the project take advantage and, as Dr. Coupe was saying, integrate their perspectives so that they can generate these complex responses to complex problems. So academics don't really have a great reputation in many cases among communities and sectors outside the academy. We've been known to kind of parachute into situations with our funding under the pretense of helping communities, but then we sort of extract what we need for our own purposes and leave the communities without much assistance. And that can make it difficult for communities and sectors outside of the academy to trust us, and rightfully so. So a critical step, in my view, in the direction of cultivating meaningful TDR within involving university researchers is to recognize that we need to develop a research culture that's collective research culture that involves not just the university representatives, but representatives from these other communities, that's conducive to building trust with communities and organizations outside the university. And I think there are three parts to this, at least three parts to this, but the three that I'd like to just briefly emphasize are work rhythms, incentives and rewards structures, and success conditions. So on the work rhythms point, TDR operates on a timetable that's out of step in many cases with the academic timetable. And it takes time, and again, this is another point that you made, Dr. Nagila, it takes time to build relationships with people outside of the academy, especially if trust isn't a given, right? And this can lead to difficulties in getting and keeping funding. It can also mean that it may take a year or more to build relationships that support the research, which means that one's productivity dips, and at least for academic researchers, that can be a real problem. That can be a disincentive to participation. There's incentive and reward structures. One thing that it's important to do is build in process-based rewards rather than product-based rewards. University evaluation systems in particular are built around product-based rewards. So lines on your CV, right? If you can put a line on your CV, then you can get credit for it. But often when it comes to process, which is what so much of TDR is, there's nothing to put on your CV. And if there's nothing to put on your CV, there's nothing to take credit for. And so that can be a real problem. We need to be thinking about how the development of relationships outside the community is something for which you should be rewarded. And how do we characterize that so that people are rewarded for that? Here's another problem. You want to incentivize participation by stakeholder communities. You want to honor and respect their participation by compensating them for their time and their effort, right? Academics get paid to do this stuff, so this is just our job. But people outside of it, the academy, don't get paid to do this. And if they're going to give you their time, they need to be compensated. But it's hard to compensate people if you don't have any funding. And so often what that means is that you don't actually involve them until after you have the funding. So you've already planned the project. But that's arguably the most important time to have their participation. So it's, one thing that would be great to do is build in ways of funding, like pre-funding or seed funding that would enable us to involve community members earlier in the process. Another thing we want to avoid is epistemic exclusion. So exclusion within units that incentivize other modes of research, right? Like certain modes of research are seen as being more important than other modes. Often TDR is one of the other modes. So we need to guard against that. And finally, success conditions. There's a lot to say here, but I'll just say, don't think in terms of publications primarily. The first order of business should be products that are valuable for partner communities. It's important to write those up so they're legible in some way or another, but it's not necessarily the case, and often shouldn't be the case, that the form of that writing is an academic publication.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I hope every one of us is taking the notes. work rhythms, incentives and reward structures, success indicators, and really a good expansion of that in many ways that are applicable to the academic world, to funding agencies, to publishers, to anyone that is supporting the research ecosystem as a whole. Professor Dr. Nakatumba Nabende, your opportunity now to also speak to the same question. Reforms and innovations are needed to align funding, publishing, and career progression. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorothy. Please just let me know that you can hear me. My video is off because of my internet. I'm not sure
Yes.
if you can hear me.
We can hear you well. Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, so I'll just keep the video off. Yeah, so I think yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Oruk, I think, for your submission. I think many of the points that I had are really aligned with what you mentioned. And I will start with the first part around thinking about us as researchers. And I know also Raphael mentioned that when I think about researchers and we need the data from the communities, how do we get this data? Do we get it in an extractive manner? Do the communities benefit from the data sets that we are collecting, and also from the products that we eventually build out for them? So I think as researchers, I think that's something that we need to really take into consideration, that the people who are giving us data are not just data give us, but at the end of the day, we're coming up with solutions that they need to be part of. So this early involvement of communities is very critical when we think about that. And that also relates to the point around funding. For most of the funding, of course, that comes in is usually short term. With trying to come up with maybe proofs of concept that we think might work or might not work. But I think as we try to do this work, as we try to do the transdisciplinary research, is can we really generate evidence of impact of the research that we are doing? Because then that helps to see the value for the funding that we have. But it also speaks to what we mentioned earlier around policy. If you want to inform policy, there should be evidence that the research that you are actually doing is solving this complex problem, because then that helps for the policymakers, for government to uptake the kind of research that comes in place. So again, I think for us is not to think about short-term projects, but to think about the fact that can we be able to generate the evidence that is required as we do this kind of research that we do. And I think I also like the issue that was mentioned around publications. Yes, as academics, we focus on publications. When we think about the promotion criteria for universities, publications are critical, but that's not all. It's not only about publications. I think there's a lot more that we can think about in terms of the output of the research that we focus on. And I think as universities, we need to think about other reward systems besides just the publication. How else has this research been able to impact the community? What was the process like? What was the community engagement like as we try to define, researchers try to define and do this research? And I think this is something that different communities and different universities can be able to uptake. And because of the fact that it's transdisciplinary research, I think about the publication avenues and trying to focus on making sure that we can break the silos, right, where we work, the silos where we publish. Because if I think about this research, it just thrives on making sure that, yeah, we have shared values from different communities, but that it's really as you know, counting at as not just a high impact paper that is coming out, but more that there's this evidence that can influence a policy shift, that can influence and a scalability of the research that has been done, and it's not just a one-off as we try to do and solve these complex problems in research. So I think I'll pause there. I hope that you had my submission. Thank you.
Yes, we did. Thank you for reminding us that TDR is really around thinking about research excellence differently, which is something that is very much at the core of what we have been discussing today. I want to thank all the panelists very much. We now have some time for some questions, for some comments. I want to encourage the panelists to still engage in the chat. Feel free to comment, make comments as we go along. There are some questions that have been presented to us, and I'm going to just read them out. There's one very interesting one around resourcing and persuasion. when building research and educational programs or collaborations that center transdisciplinary, what lessons do the panelists offer to convince those who aren't convinced about the value of TDR? And I'm assuming that this is within the academy itself. So I'm not sure which panelists would like to take that on, but please welcome whoever unmuted. Welcome to respond to that. I see
So,
Professor Cooper, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
okay, yeah, that was not intentional. So, well, I think it's a big question, but it's a question. If the person who asked question might be slightly dissatisfied with my answer, but let me put it this way: is that to persuade people, they have to talk about actually a topic that seems obvious. What is the role of the university in society? What has happened, I think, is that university has morphed into itself, and everything is about the university. And also because of that, that is why I was talking about critical self-flexibility and reimagining and repositioning the university. Is that it has morphed into self in that it sees its products as graduates, the students, and then it sees itself as also producing, knowledge in the form of publications specified as targets for specific categories of staff. And that is how you get promoted, and that is how you rise in the academy. I think all of those things are pretty important and they are of value to society, but they are not enough. A good friend of mine, Professor Chris Brink, wrote a very interesting book. He used to be vice chancellor of Newcastle University, his last job in the UK. It's called The Soul of a University When Excellence is Not Enough. And as in that book, he also does something that, in discussing with these colleagues that might be reluctant, shows how rankings have corrupted the academy as it moves into itself as well. Because now things are for quantification, counting, and for being put in a log, like soccer teams, if you like. That is not the role of a university in society. Its claim to fame actually is breakthrough knowledge that addresses pressing challenges and issues in society. It transforms society. It's a change agent, if you like. And that is why TDR is so attractive to many of my co-panelists and others in this, is that it retains the university to that mission without saying that some of things that it does are not important. The teaching, the research, even that narrowly directed, counting publications, and the very important research that is about basic fundamental research. Because we are not saying TDR subsumes, and that is one argument one can use with colleagues. TDR does not subsume other forms of research. It's not more important. You cannot do transdisciplinary research if you don't have disciplinary foundations, if you are not operating at the leading edge of the disciplines. You can't do that if you are not able to do multidisciplinary research or interdisciplinary research. So it's not an either or. It's like, colleague, drop the research you are doing and now do TDR. It's, if you like, a continuum directed at all of the things that the university ought and must contribute to society. So if I were to stand in front of colleagues reluctant, that would be my pitch, that would be my story, and I would stick to it.
I think it's such a necessary pitch on so many levels, not just for the academy, but also I come from a funding agency perspective. And when we talk about indicators and we talk about ratings and we talk about how many publications in order to consider whether we are going to fund you or not, instead of thinking about narrative CVs and thinking about the process aspects. I think it was so important to remind us what is the role of the university, how far the university has moved, and how TDR enables the university to move back into, especially a university in the global south and the African continent, a university to move back to this question of how relevant are you in the society where you are, the impact that you're able to provide through the research that you support and you stand for. And also really, really critical, the point that you have made around TDR being a part of other types of research? Because I think often people think about this is the next frontier, this is where all the funders are funding. Therefore, all of us have to move from our disciplinary foundations, our interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research work into TDR so we can be able to attract funding, but reminding us that it is one of in a continuum. Thank you for that. Professor O'Rourke, there is a question here for you. Based on your work with the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, what specific dialogue or communication practices have you found most effective in maintaining trust and collaboration among diverse partners and local communities?
I appreciate that, Dr. Nagila. If you would it be inappropriate for me to briefly to just address the previous question first, and then would that be okay?
Yes, of course. And any
Okay.
panelists that would like to. Yes, very much so.
No, I thought I completely agree with Dr. Coupe. I think that that his kind of account of what needs to be emphasized and what needs to be changed is spot on. I think some of us, like Mr. Lemby and myself, are kind of lucky in that we're at universities, Michigan State University. We're at a university, Michigan State University, that is in the United States known as a land grant university. And land grant universities exist to help, in part, I mean, large part, to help people in the region solve problems that they have with research-based solutions. So our university is already sort of predisposed to be sensitive to the kinds of problems that can motivate transdisciplinary responses. I think universities, and this just I think just echoes Dr. Coupe. Universities really stake their reputations on their status as knowledge engines, right? Developing insights and innovations that advance human understanding, and it can be difficult sometimes to make legible the kind of transdisciplinary research products to folks in leadership at universities, because it's, you're focusing on a highly contextualized issue that has deep meaning for the people who are dealing with it, but perhaps isn't something that's going to be obviously important or relevant to people outside of that context, right? So the key thing, as I mentioned before, was legibility. How do you make a response to something highly contextual like that legible to folks in leadership at universities who are all about advancing human understanding? And I think there are a number of ways to do that, but again, it helps to find yourself in an institutional context that's already predisposed, like land grant universities in the United States, toward the valuing contextual problems. And again, that's just like a footnote to what Dr. Coupe said, I think. The question about Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so I'm an executive director of the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative Center at MSU, and we run structured dialogues designed to build collaborative capacity in complex research teams. And many of these teams have been transdisciplinary. Maintaining trust and collaboration among diverse partners. Here are a couple of things. At first, when we started this, we believed we had a structure for the dialogue that we could apply across contexts, and so it's like one toolbox to rule them all. And so we just used it in our first 100 workshops, more or less, were structured by this one toolbox instrument, which is a survey-like instrument that provides the topics for the dialogue. But then we realized, over time, we realized that we needed to meet our partners where they're at. So if we were working with somebody and structuring a dialogue for them to help them address their communication issues and collaboration issues, we needed to spend a lot more time on the front end learning about them and acquiring an understanding of their positionality and of the issues that they were struggling with. And so we really flipped things from being more top down to being much more bottom up. And that means spending time building trust with the partners long before the dialogue even takes place, right? So that we make sure that when the dialogue does take place, the participants in it recognize the issues as important and as central to their particular project context, whatever that might be. So meeting them where they're at, that's a key part of success in our case. Another thing that we try to do, if it's relevant, is conduct the dialogue in the language that's spoken by the participants. An example of this was a dialogue a toolbox dialogue that we ran in Ethiopia, in Bishoftu, during one of these meetings with the Witty Weeds project. We designed an instrument that was used by about 20 people, stakeholders, many of them indigenous community members, and the dialogue was conducted in 4 languages. My partner and I, both Americans, did not conduct that dialogue. We were not a part of. We observed it. Our Ethiopian partners, who spoke these languages, were the ones who conducted the dialogue, and that was again a way of demonstrating respect for the participants, and as a way of ensuring that they could think out loud in the language that made the most sense to them. And I think that was also a demonstration of a kind of demonstration that builds trust within the group. If the group didn't, in our dialogues, if the group isn't bought in to the dialogue's probably not going to be any good. So in order for them to be bought in, you really need to honor and respect their participation and their perspectives.
Thank you for that. And I think a really important principle for me that you are raising is continually going back to think about what your positionality as a researcher is. So if you're collecting data, are you really the right person to be managing that process with communities? Where should
That's
you
exactly
be
right.
positioning yourself, right?
Yep,
And TDR really requires the researcher to be reflexive in ways that push what we have traditionally known in the academy about the researcher's positionality. And I think when you're bringing in different disciplines, this is where I always like to say the social scientists and the humanities colleagues in the room are so good at engaging with this question of where am I positioned as a researcher?
Yep.
And they can be so helpful to bring together all the other colleagues that are from other disciplines and really support them in asking those very important questions so that they can meet partners where exactly they are. Professor Dr. Joyce, I want to ask this question to you, because you talked about data and you talked about the ways in which you're connecting different disciplines. Marcelina asks about qualitative tools and how they can be used to effectively combine with empirical or data-driven methods in TDR. Are you able to expand on your example around applying AI and machine learning in agriculture and the dialogues, the conversations to respond to this question? Thank you, Professor Nakatumba.
Yeah, thank you for the question around the data and the tools. So when I think about it, of course, we start with thinking about data that we collect, for example, from the farmers, looking at image data. So that data can transform into a machine learning model that you can train, and then you're able to give out to the communities. But if the model is given out to the community, that is not enough, right? Because yes, I can give you a tool, I can give you a product, yes, we have co-developed it together. From the beginning to understand the actual problem that my model is trying to solve. Because when we're doing machine learning, it's really problem driven. Have we understood the problem that we are trying to solve, the problem for which we are collecting data, training the model, and then doing some prediction or doing some analysis with the tool or the model that we are developing? But that's not enough. So, and what helps is if you have an understanding, for example, from the qualitative perspective and working together with social scientists to understand the impact of the tools that are being developed. So can you then step back and then think about the fact that if the goal that you had was to use the tool to help to provide advisory to increase the yield over time. So how can you quantitatively be able to measure that? How can you speak that to the farmers to understand, did their perspectives change when they use the technology? Are they, more empowered with knowledge to solve the problems that they have in the communities with the tools that you are giving them to use? If I think about an example, for example, in health, like the work that we do around health is if I have a machine learning model or a tool that's able to help for diagnosis of disease, and you're giving this tool to a doctor to use or to a screening nurse to use, for example, for cervical cancer, how are they able to trust the tool that you're giving them, right? Are you able to understand their perspectives to know that the tool is not merely replacing them, but it's supporting them at the point at which maybe they have a long line of women that they have to screen to support to be able to triage, for example, the difficult cases that can move forward for maybe more care that has to be provided across the continuum of care that has to be given to a patient. So it's really trying to match the fact that you start with the numbers, you start with the data, you start with your models and accuracy, etc., all those quantitative metrics that you think about, but it's not there. You want to generate evidence from the community, evidence from the people who are using the tools from a qualitative nature, that then this can help you and inform as you continue to improve the models, as you continue to improve the tools that you're providing out to the community. So that would be my perspective in trying to merge these two disciplines. Thank you.
I think what you're saying is that what I'm hearing from you is there is so much value in using these different methodologies to come together, but that at the end of the day, you must center who your key stakeholders are and make sure that all the other aspects around the boundedness of the research is centering what the value the stakeholders have to add, and that it must be negotiated with them in that way. Thank you for that. Question for you, Mr. Lembi, is about how your backgrounds, disciplinary backgrounds, how do you come into TDR without allowing them to influence the method and the outcome of the research? This is one of the questions that has been asked. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I see that Christian made this question. I see that Professor Works also typing an answer. And I think that's an excellent question. And I think my take on this is that I don't think you're supposed to overcome, your disciplinary background. I think rather than like thinking of it as something that's in the way of your research, I feel like you need to embrace, you're a philosopher and, you can't change that about yourself. You're already gone for like the whole, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of going to university to become a philosopher. So rather than thinking that it's something that's in the way of your inter or transdisciplinary research, something that, as you already are doing, something that you're aware about yourself and that you welcome and that you know about yourself. And what you need to figure out then is how this influences the way you think. And how can then I bring maybe other people to my, I don't know, my committee or to my research project that will make me the right make you or make me the right questions, to make me figure out what are like the blind spots that my philosophical way of viewing a problem is maybe leading me to like not take some other things that are maybe super interesting and super relevant into account. So I would say that rather than being like worried that you have a bias that will influence your problem, it's about like Dr. Nico said, like about welcoming your position, your positionality, being aware of it and how it shapes who you are and how you think. And then once you know that, you can start engaging or thinking about other ways of thinking. So if I were to think about this problem like a biologist would think, what are the novel insights that this can generate? And you also have to know this is also one of your strengths, because your biologist colleague, or your like a mathematician colleague, he or she will not be able to think the same way you do. So it's about like taking like what's philosophy can enrich about your project, about your perspective, about what you're doing, while also recognizing that it's also limiting you in some ways. And that's why you need like diverse perspectives and diverse groups of people working together to make sure that the biases are, like getting mixed, in a fun and like productive way, not that like they're like standing in the way of each other. And I feel like the professor wants to say some stuff about this as well, because he was typing an answer in the Q&A. Thank you.
Great.
I
Professor.
was typing the answer, but I'm not anymore. You I can't add anything to what you just said. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your discipline is your enemy. It is also how you're centered. If you think about it that way, then you're able to add other people, and then it adds value to what you bring to the table. That is what I'm hearing. Professor Cooper, please go ahead.
As I've seen at least two questions about people asking about evaluation metrics for TDR and how it is to be measured and evaluated. I think that in the conversation it's clear that we have said that the output of TDR should not be judged merely by publications. In fact, Dr. O'Rourke said that the emphasis should not be how many publications come out of it, and that the impact, therefore, is really societal impact, if you like. Impact, of course, is a word that is now bandied around. It exists in academia as well as, what is your impact factor, for journals and all of that and so on. So the academic metrics for particular purposes of universities, and I'll look back to that. But societal impact is something different. What change have you engendered in society? But of course, in the manner in which we are speaking is we must be careful again that now it doesn't look like the Messiah with their academic knowledge came to change the community. And I think that what Mr. Lembi, Dr. O'Rourke, and Dr. Nakumba have said that is not the intention. The intention is to work with the communities to engender change that is positive, that is transformative, and that is sustainable. Now, that kind of evaluation or metrics, therefore, cannot just be university driven or measured at the university side. It would have to be actually measured on the community side. Yeah. So I know that there's somebody who works very much in this research for impact area. I think it's Professor Mark Reed, if I'm not mistaken, but I see that he used to work at Leeds University. I see in the audience here, there's Professor Claire Quinn, who works at Leeds University, might have worked with them. She works in sustainable food systems. And I had a conversation with him on how that can be measured, if you like, evaluated, and what metrics. I'm doing this deliberately to say the word evaluation, metrics, and so on is kind of tainted in what we are talking about. Because societal change, and that is why I ended my previous answer about reading that book, which had 10 failed TDR projects, but which the authors qualified to mean failed in the traditional sense of the word, however, engendered certain changes in aspects of the community that were not necessarily written previously in the research project, if you like. So I think that essentially TDR is asking for us to value societal impact more than academic metrics. But I am a former university vice chancellor or president, as they call it in America. I can tell you that it will be difficult to some of our funders, including those of us who are public universities and how universities work, to simply say that the traditional metrics don't matter. they do matter, but what they should not be, they are now being given overdue emphasis, in part because of the ranking system, and in part because we are addicted to these traditional ways of measuring, if you like. I think that the question for me we should always ask is, are we engendering societal change and impact? Now, I'm using the word engendering deliberately because also it includes the word gender, because some change in our society sometimes can best be marked by changes in gender, equality imbalances, because that's one of the wicked problems of society, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to do a round that just stems from your response, Professor Coupe, to the rest of the panelists that surround this question of metrics and evaluation, as well as what you're noticing as funding agencies, universities' adaptation to support TDR. How are they doing this? So very much in the same frame as Professor Coupe. Know who wants to go first? Can I ask you, Dr. Nakatumba Nabende, to go first? Thank you.
Yes, I can go first. Yeah, so I think for us, thinking about what's happening at Macquarie is really that, yeah, you have done your research, but I think what is more important is what is the impact? And I know impact has just been mentioned already by Professor Kupe. What is the impact of your research? How do you move knowledge from the journals that you're publishing to something that, for example, an authority in Uganda can take up to make decisions? I feel like for me that's very important that there's evidence, right, of this, of evidence of the knowledge that you're generating, but it can also move to the fact that someone can pick up what you have done and make a decision upon. Is there sustainability of the work that you're doing? Can we scale what you're doing, for example, from one community to another community? I think for me, that is something that feels like it's important. Have we formed new partnerships? And of course, it all drives back. And when I think about the work that you do, the work that we do, and I think about societal good, it just takes me back to the SDGs, right? Like in any work that we are trying to do, we have kind of have the bigger goal that we're trying to solve of, yeah, no hunger, education for all, things like that. And I think about the fact that as we are doing this research, how do we contribute to those? Have we measured this? Is there evidence to show that there's our work that TDR research that we are doing is contributing, to these SDGs that have already been developed for us? Is there evidence for it? And I think that it's a difficult thing as the panelists have already mentioned to move away from just thinking about publications, but I think it's a lot more than that because we do research, we say we're going to solve this particular problem. We are very happy and very excited as we write out our proposals for funding. But then when we are happy at the end, of course, we have a publication, it ends there, the funding is over, and off we go to another funding call, right? To another funding body, to another area of TDR that we are focusing on. But that shouldn't be what it should be. I think there should be some depth in the kind of work that we do. There should be some evidence of the things that we've mentioned here around the community, around policy, around evidence, around impact, around someone saying, I can, and it doesn't even have to work, right? Like sometimes you can't do work and it's not, it doesn't work. It can be something that is a failure lesson that another researcher or innovator in my field can think about and pick up and then run with it to continue doing the research that is important. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Limby, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I'm also thinking about this question that's just been added at 921, thinking about, that like, being asked to do these things, being evaluated by them. We need metrics, sure, we're being successful, but all of this is not like adding up to the funding timelines, the publication pressures, the academic calendars. And I do think that there is no like single like solution going forward, but I feel like an example of things that are like sort of like gesturing towards how things could be differently, like for instance, this panel here right now, if you have panels, if you have, efforts and events hosted by universities that are showing like the relevance of transdisciplinary research, you may be like starting to like convince some people, that like, that the panel on transdisciplinary research like as valuable as like the panel on like AI, that both of these like contributions are like important and that could serve and that could also be, measure for evaluation or like included in evaluation. But like Dr. O'Rourke was saying, I feel like it's important to think about these process-based sort of like successes and metrics rather than only outcome-based or like a publication-based, product-based. I think that's the word he used. But I think it's a trick question, and I do feel that us who are trying to do transparent research are just like adding more to our plate without like getting much more compensation in return. But what I will say is that all of the people that I know that still try to do it, try to engage with, feel much more sense of meaning in their careers and the work they're doing because you're actually, like engaging and facing like, the so-called real world problems. So it is tricky. The evaluations and the metrics are not going to be on your side, but it is going to be feeling more meaningful and maybe an even more joyous and fun adventure because as you start to meet new people, spend more time on the ground and connecting with others and building these relationships.
Thank you very much. Professor O'Rourke, the final word to you.
Yeah, this is, I'm not sure I have that much to add. I think, at least one dimension of academic success is producing work that has value for other people, that maybe adds to what we know, and but in many cases, I mean, you could argue that when it comes to philosophy, philosophers have been arguing about the same things, same questions for thousands of years. So it's you might wonder how much philosophers have actually added to what we know. But I think the value of philosophy is that people will say, going back to Socrates, isn't so much in the answers, it's in the questions. And so another way that academic researchers can add value is by stimulating different ways of thinking about problems and issues. And so, but the key thing here, it seems to me, is that academic success is tied to influence and impact, where impact is often seen to be um, influencing others in various ways, like providing something that could serve as a model for thinking and for thought and action in other contexts. Publication is a key vehicle for making that happen, right? I mean, you write something, get it peer reviewed, published, and then people can cite it and build on it and or react to it, whatever. So publication is a key vehicle, but it's the publication's instrumentally valuable. It's not intrinsically valuable. It's instrumentally valuable because it spreads these ideas out, right? So we need to figure out ways of spreading out the what we learn when we conduct transdisciplinary research with communities. We need to find ways of writing up case studies that highlight how the problems that we addressed in this context like are analogous in various ways to other problems, or this context has relevant analogies to other contexts, right? So that we can encourage people to take advantage of what we know from or what we've learned from this particular effort, and put it into practice in other places. Of course, publication is a way to do that, but that isn't the only way to do that. And there are other ways of disseminating what you learn that can have value. And we just need, as a university, in my opinion, to acknowledge that and reward that in when it comes to annual review time and other, tenure and promotion and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. So what I am hearing from our panel is to do TDR well, we all have to be human. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Time, time, time. Trust, trust, trust. That's what makes us human, to bring the humanity back into the academy. Research culture needs to shift quite significantly across all the different actors in the research ecosystem, and all of us have the responsibility to shift that research culture in the spaces where we are occupying. And lastly, there are clear enemies and allies of TDR, and it's so important to make sure that we understand that and also position TDR correctly within the research pipeline. It has been a great pleasure for me to moderate. I want to thank the panelists very much for immensely enlightening and providing concrete contributions to this panel. And now I hand over back to Dr. Amy Jamieson to close the session for us. Thank you.
Thank you all, and excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Nagila, for your excellent moderation of this session. I want to thank all the panelists. I was just riveted throughout the course of the dialogue, and I see that we have such an overwhelming amount of engagement from our audience members as well. Comments, questions flying back and forth in the chat. This is really what we were aiming to spark. And so it looks like there's more to discuss, and we're talking about what would some future dialogues look like in this space. But I think the panelists brought a very good mix of perspectives on this and experience. I want to thank each and every one of them for joining us today, sharing their expertise, and moving forward this discussion. The Alliance for African Partnership is really pleased to support these types of dialogues, and we'll be continuing to do so in the future. We also want to acknowledge support from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which is funding a consortium-wide program looking at transdisciplinarity and AI. And this is the first activity or piece of that project. And so we want to thank them for their support. in keeping with that, I want to turn the microphone over to my colleague Jose Jackson Maleti, who does have an announcement for us. So Jose, please come in with that.
Thank you so much, Amy. This was excellent. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better start to our project. I know many of you don't know the details of the project yet. We are going to be announcing this very soon, but this is a great start. Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you, everyone, all of the panelists. You were excellent. And don't be surprised when we call on you to do other things now that we see where you are. You've been great. So I just wanted to announce our next cohort of the African Futures Research Leadership Program. I think everybody knows that we run this program for early career researchers at the universities that are in the AAP Consortium. We're excited to say that our next cohort, cohort 6, is going to be on a theme, Artificial Intelligence in Africa, Transdisciplinary Innovations for Sustainable Futures. It's open right now. The call is open. Applications are due November 21st. We're looking forward to receiving lots of applications so that we have a headache of selecting the 10 scholars that will be part of the program. Some of you will have roles. Some of you who are on this panel are going to have roles, and we're going to be in touch with you soon to share what those roles are. So thank you all very much, and thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, and we look forward to the future. All right, bye.
Thanks, everyone.